Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mainstream Indie Music channel. Thank you so much for all the support that I've gotten. We're almost at 1,200 subscribers, and I know, we're over 100 videos in, and just now I can hear the comments, I can hear the people. Just now you're talking about Death Cab for Cutie? Well, yes and no, because early on, in fact, I believe it was within the first 10 videos of this channel, we talked about Ben Gibbard alone because of his work with both Death Cab for Cutie, but also the Postal Service as well. In fact, at the time in 2024, he was actually headlining both bands in one night. I believe, Postal Service would come on first, and then Death Cab would end the concert. I think that's absolutely insane to be doing. That's like a 5 hour show, but I mean, Ben nowadays is like into ultra marathons, so I think now his health is able to keep up with it. But anyway, if you want to check that out, check out that video. We're here though for Death Cab for Cutie. Now, Death Cab has been a band since the late 90s. They have been together. In fact, I believe it was, oh man, was it 3 or 4 albums in when they really started to gain momentum? I believe their third album was Transatlanticism, and their fourth album was Plans. Actually, scratch that. Transatlanticism was their fourth album, and Plans was their fifth album. So it did take them a while to start to get going, but they did have a very loyal fan base before. I would even say Transatlanticism somewhat put them on the map, but I think Plans is what kind of got them in front of the most people. Now, the band was formed by Ben as a solo project. But when he first was trying to get signed and have like a manager try to get on a record label, even though it was a little bit of a smaller one, they made a stipulation for him and said you had to have a band. And so that is what he did. And the Death Cab kind of rotation for them as a band didn't really get set in the early years. He got bits and pieces along the way. Definitely we're going to talk about Chris Walla here in a little bit. But it took them a little while to kind of rotate and find the people that, the four of them that got together to make the most music. But just think of it as Ben, Nick, Jason, and Chris being the four main ones pretty much through their entire huge run. Now, the name of Death Cab for Cutie, the origin of it kind of goes back and forth. Kind of depending on who you ask in an interview. The biggest one is this was already a pre-existing name that was picked out. I love the name too. Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, I believe, is the name of the group, and it was on their album Gorilla. And they love the name so much they stuck with it. Of course, many people as well know it being featured on the Beatles, I would say hits, but their movie Magical Mystery Tour. Some people have even stated that the name came from a mixture of those things, but also throw in the fact that there was the whole conspiracy theory about Paul McCartney being dead, so they called it Death Cab for Cutie. Again, there's a whole bunch of names. It's kind of funny now. Ben in interviews says that it's one of those things where if they would have known the name of this band became so iconic, they would have just picked kind of like a simpler name. But nowadays it's kind of too little too late for that. They're legends in the indie rock genre and alternative genre. It's when we've gone through our list of bands that we've talked about on here, between Death Cab, Arcade Fire, and other bands like David Byrne, so on and so forth. Death Cab definitely is on the Mount Rushmore of indie artists. It's just impossible to talk about indie rock without them. But, like I said, Transatlanticism, the album and the song, was their very first kind of breakthrough that started to get them recognition. Now, even though it was their fourth album that was released, they had actually only been a band for about 5 or 6 years at that point, and little did they know what was coming next was going to change everything. Plans is a platinum album. You know, you got Soul Meets Body on that album. You got I Will Follow You Into the Dark and Crooked Teeth. You know, they just really could not miss on this album. And like I said, the critics loved it, the fans loved it, and they got commercial recognition and success from that album. A lot of people see this album too, along with the kind of surgence of Coldplay at the time, and with Ben Gibbard's side project, the Postal Service, blowing up as well at the same time. People saw this album as the shift of indie music breaking into the mainstream as one of the first times it happening. You could debate that, you know, you could say again, there have been indie artists that have broken into the mainstream. Even in the past, you know, indie bands have kind of broken in, but I mean, little to no bands I can think of did it as loudly as Death Cab for Cutie did. And they said they were under a lot of pressure. You know, they wanted to keep that kind of like indie sound and image going, but they recognized like, hey, we are being well known in the music atmosphere nowadays. So it's kind of hard to keep that image going. Narrow Stairs was the next album, and Chris has made a lot of comments about this album. I think even more than Ben, where he said this album was really a very quick follow-up to Plans. They were trying to capitalize a lot on that wave, and they kind of just blitzed the recording. And I'm not even saying that in a bad way. It was, they really just wanted to take advantage of it. And I mean, it was successful. You know, I Will Possess Your Heart, Kath, Grapevine Fires, you know, an amazing follow-up to the Plans album. The next album, Codes and Keys, I'm really going to have to save because I really want to make an entire video about this period of time. To say it's divisive is, you know, putting it very lightly amongst the Death Cab fans and amongst the band members themselves. Ben Gibbard himself has stated he has really mixed emotions about this album and even ranked it as his lowest favorite or least favorite album that they have ever made. Kintsugi was their next album, and interestingly, it was Chris Walla's last, where he helped produce and mix it with the band, but after that, he was done. Their last album, after a lineup shakeup after that, of course, was released in 2022. But I want to hear from you guys now. I am ranking Death Cab for Cutie just below the two mainstream title. They definitely are indie, but to say they're even underground indie is a little too much. What do y'all think? I want to hear about it.